It's hard to believe, but there was a time when American media was harder and more cynical, frightening news consumers with stories of roving gangs of youths and dilapidated cityscapes in which society had crumbled. And if you accidentally went into the wrong neighborhood, you were guaranteed to get killed. They were the type of stories that kept old people pining for the days of Ronald Reagan and scared white women into calling kids super predators.
They are often the kinds of kids that are called super predators. No conscience, no empathy.
But I'm sure that never came back to haunt her. And because all films that chase the cultural algorithm are inherently political, Hollywood started to reflect those beliefs. Stallone went from playing a fascist cop to playing a cop who longs for the days when cops, but not politicians, could be fascist, to playing a cyber-fascist.
You betray the law!
And we get films like this, which were part of a short-lived middle-class men in peril subgenre, where middle-class men, made soft by technology and wealth, were forced to confront rugged hypermasculine pores. It's just weird the things we preoccupy ourselves with. In effect, Judgment Night positions the inner city itself as the antagonist, which winds up making a political statement as much as it tries to be a dumb action flick.
Lucy! I'm home! Got some splaining to do!
And while I won't go so far as to say it's a smart movie masquerading as a dumb movie, there is a more interesting story buried under this patchwork of set pieces that has the nerve to call itself a movie. It's a story about the intersections of class, systemic racism, and the veneer of masculinity. Judgment Night is a film known more for its troubled production and groundbreaking soundtrack than anything that happens on screen. Adapted from a spec script from Kevin Jarre, the writer of Glory, Navy SEALs, and Tombstone, and based on ideas from the producers of Predator and Die Hard, it seemed like a can't-miss prospect. Production never really got off the ground, though, and producer after producer resurrected the project with new screenwriters, including Oscar nominees Christopher Crowe and Randall Wallace, and horror icon John Carpenter. Carpenter would have made a lot of sense to attach to this project in retrospect, since the set pieces so closely resemble Carpenter's own Escape from New York. The script was turned down by John Travolta, Kevin Spacey, Ray Liotta, and Christian Slater before producers were finally able to cast everyone except for the leading man, Frank Wyatt. Unfortunately for producers, their hesitancy cost them dearly, as they were ready to go into production without a leading man and were getting desperate. So Emilio Estevez was able to squeeze much more out of them than his usual quote. In fact, it was a $4 million payday, accounting for nearly a quarter of the film's budget. Unfortunately for producers, the film wasn't even able to make back its modest budget, slipping in and out of theaters fairly quickly and drawing mostly scorn or apathy from critics. Even its own cast isn't particularly high on the film. Star Denis Leary derided it in interviews and said it was sold to him as something much more thoughtful. House of Pain rapper Everlast, who plays a small role as a henchman, is significantly less kind to his own movie than Leary is, calling it a, quote, piece of shit. But I have to admit, edgy teenage me was pretty excited about this one, thanks to the presence of angry MTV everyman Denis Leary. And I was one of the few who looked forward to this film, and honestly, from an action standpoint, it's fine. Director Stephen Hopkins gives the production way more effort than the script deserves, which lifts it to respectability, and a game cast, despite their clear derision for the material, makes this a fun watch. With all the reappraisals of 90s bombs happening, maybe this is another film that deserves a second chance. And there's no time like the 30th anniversary of the film. What are some other 90s horror or thriller films that are worthy of a second look? Let me know in the comments. Oh, and I think you hear me knocking, and I think I'm coming in with some spoilers, so be warned. Judgment Night tells the story of Frank, Mike, John, and Ray, four Chicago suburbanites who just went a boys' night out at a boxing match, only to run afoul of a local gang when they make a wrong turn into the inner city. Frank, played by Emilio Estevez, is the family man with a newborn daughter, which the film makes sure to drive home several times.
Only one of your friends who has a family.
Frank! Beautiful baby! Wow! Lucky for you, she looks just like your wife, huh?
I got a wife and a little girl, and I will get back to them tonight!
You got a family.
Frank is the one with the family. Get that straight now or the whole movie is ruined for you. His best friend Mike, played by Cuba Gooding Jr., is the cool one, and is so transparently the black friend who has to answer questions about the street or the hood, when clearly he's lived his whole life in the suburbs, has a career as an office manager, and spends his weekends playing Nerf hockey. This guy has ordered a froyo in his life, that's all I'm saying. Their friend Ray, played by Entourage's Jeremy Piven, somehow looking 20 years older here than he did as Ari Gold, is a sleazy businessman who is a self-styled mover and shaker, but is actually the guy who spends his weekends waiting out the most desperate woman at last call. In other words, every other Jeremy Piven character, but more so. Rounding out the foursome is Stephen Dorff, thespian extraordinaire, as Frank's wannabe dirtbag little brother John. The most interesting thing I can say about him is that it was clear this was supposed to be Christian Slater. John's first appearance is also the first time in the film, but certainly not the last. That having a junky car or ratty clothes will be treated as symbolic of a personality defect, and not just having little to no money. It's implied that John is a wannabe dirtbag because of some daddy issues, but that's never really followed up on. Get used to that because there's a lot of that in the script, where they include a throwaway line and then they just say, okay, you got that, and then we move on. And we never get any follow-up on it. It's like the script is aware that these characters are just video game avatars, so it tries to sprinkle some fictive breadcrumbs along the way to help the audience piece it together. Despite a guilt trip from Frank's beautiful wife, remember he has a family.
You got a family.
The boys hop in Ray's borrowed state-of-the-art RV and leave the safety of the suburbs for the fight. We get some brief banter to establish the social dynamics that will play out later in the film. Frank is a former wild child who has gone soft in his domestic life. Mike is the guy who's always there to remind him of that fact. Ray is the wannabe who always gets by having a line of bullshit. And Frank and John just don't get along with one another.
You're late, as usual.
All of these guys have varying degrees of immature or macho attitudes about life, which rapidly becomes apparent when they get stuck in traffic and experience a bit of road rage.
Oh, this guy just hit me! He just hit me!
John picks a fight with the guy and Mike has to end it. Frank, of course, scolds John for fighting because...
John, there's a lot of craziness going on out there. You never know what maniac is gonna pull out a gun and blow your goddamn brains out. It happens every day in the city.
And this was before Bill O'Reilly even had an hour a night to scare people.
Say, baby, put down that pipe and get my pipe up.
Frustrated with the traffic jam, Ray pulls off the expressway and heads through a dilapidated inner-city neighborhood. The inner-city set dressing comes off like some Capcom beat-em-up game with swirling garbage, fiery trash cans, and unhoused people strewn along the streets. It's something that was criticized even at the time and would almost certainly catch the smackdown from the Chicago Chamber of Commerce these days. Our middle-class heroes make sure to drive home just what a shithole all these poors choose to live in.
I bet there's some tremendous real estate bargains down here.
It's here where the film both overtly and subtly makes comments about class, while desperately trying to avoid bringing race into the conversation. The boys are clearly Chicago North Shore, one of the most affluent areas of the country. For reference, Chicago's north side is the heavily white suburbs where almost all John Hughes movies take place. On the south and east side of the city, you get areas like Bronzeville and Cabrini Green, the neighborhood made famous by the Candyman movies, and also where many of the Chicago scenes in this film were shot. Not surprisingly, only 15% of Bronzeville is white, and in fact the neighborhood lost nearly 60% of its residents since the 1970s. The people left behind are the people who either had roots in the neighborhood or didn't have the means to get out along with everybody else. Now, given the film shows the RV traveling south in one shot and north in the very next shot, I'm not going to sit here and say that the filmmakers intended some grand commentary. There wasn't that much thought put into it. To his credit, director Stephen Hopkins was cognizant of the idea of city planning itself as systemic racism. But he also states he didn't care to deal with it in the narrative.
You just end up in the wrong part of town, and the fears that come up just being there, even if you're there for 5 minutes, you know, it's all of a sudden all these irrational things come up in your mind, and you realize that it's an underlying thing for most human beings in the world, I think.
The fact that they were aware of it, but avoided talking about it, though, is what accidentally makes this whole thing such an apt commentary. The characters throw random comments about the neighborhood out there, and even when other characters disagree, it's always at the surface level, and then they move on with the plot. Because that's how most people think about these issues.
Where are the cops, man? Someone must have heard the blast.
Yeah, well, you can dynamite a whole city block, they wouldn't come.
That's criminal.
You really think one of these freaks are gonna let us shoot their phone?
These freaks are our neighbors, Ray.
Well, not my neighbors, man.
Oh yeah? I bet we haven't been more than 10 miles from your front door this whole night.
You can kind of see that deeper movie trying to come out at times, but then they just go right back to the chase movie. At one point, the RV is clearly on the 9094, which for a 7-mile stretch is called the Dan Ryan Expressway. Why do we care? Because one of the criticisms of the Dan Ryan was that it was built in the 1960s to intentionally divide the city by race, with African-American Bronzeville on one side and heavily Irish Bridgeport on the other. North Shore whites could literally drive over the less desirable black areas of town instead of having to go through them. And when that happens, it perpetuates economic isolation. And that's exactly what is happening here until Ray gets off the expressway. These four men are being forced to confront the consequences produced by their affluent lifestyles. Ray, we learn, has packed a gun but no map. As he and Mike look for a map in the glove compartment, they hear a thud of someone getting hit by the RV. This is probably the first movie to use the trope, but of course we get the divided lines as Ray wants to avoid involving the cops and a breathalyzer, but the rest of the guys want to make sure that the person is okay. It turns out the kid, Teddy, played by New York Undercover's Michael De Lorenzo, was on the run after ripping off a criminal gang, and that's why he was in the middle of the street. And it wasn't the RV that hurt him that badly. The kid's been shot. The guys pull him in over Ray's objections and try to get the attention of the police. Instead, though, the gang that is chasing him rams them and drags Teddy out into the street. Here we're introduced to the main heavy, Fallon, played by then stand-up comedian Denis Leary, who at the time was only known for angry ranting vignettes on MTV and a scenery-chewing role in Stallone's Demolition Man.
I'm into freedom of speech and freedom of choice. I'm the kind of guy who likes to sit in a greasy spoon and wonder, gee, should I have the T-bone steak or the jumbo rack of barbecue ribs with the side order gravy fry?
In all roles up to this point, he's basically just Denis Leary. Fallon guns down the poor kid for stealing and turns his wrath on the boys in the van to ensure that there are no witnesses. This is where the film goes from macho boys' night out bonding session to, as Leary described it to Entertainment Weekly, a 2-hour chase movie. And he's not wrong. The middle of the film is basically set piece after set piece, and how much you enjoy it will depend on how those set pieces work for you. In the first of those set pieces, the guys duck into a rail yard and encounter a group of hobos just hanging out in a pitch-black boxcar. This is one of those areas where you don't have to turn your brain off so much as shift into, I don't care where the ghost platform went, I just want to enjoy the Tyrannosaurus. It doesn't make a lick of sense for a hobo gang to be there, other than to shake down our boys when Fallon's crew comes looking for them.
What do you think of the neighborhood? Call these condos down here. Don't move. Don't whisper. Don't even breathe.
It does facilitate a plot device where Frank gives up his wallet, and it winds up in Fallon's possession, letting Fallon know where he lives. It also leads to the world's least convincing fake-out when one of the boxcar men rips off Mike's football jacket, only to get taken out by Fallon. Ray, of course, proves himself to be the ultimate shitweasel, first hanging up the phone on the 911 call and pretending he doesn't have service, and later hiding the gun from the group and not telling them he had it the whole time. This happens in the second set piece, where the guys run into a housing project and are reluctantly taken in by two women. Despite their multiple calls to 911, the cops never arrive, proving once again that Flavor Flav was right all along.
I dialed 911 a long time ago. Don't you see how late they react?
In a brief, interesting scene, Fallon's boys come across a mostly black gang who runs this neighborhood, and Fallon pays respect to the leader, offering to buy information on the North Shore guys' whereabouts. This scene clears a very low bar for best dialogue in the movie, as the gang leader complains about the money having blood on it, and Fallon retorts,
"You ever seen any that didn't?"
This is another scene that acknowledges the racial dynamics of Chicago, as Fallon's crew are clearly in a foreign neighborhood. This drives home the point about the Dan Ryan being a dividing line. Fallon's men had to cross the Dan Ryan boundary from the Irish-run part of the city to the black neighborhood to chase Frank and friends. Importantly though, Fallon is unique among his men as he understands they are the interlopers here, and that reputation is everything in these neighborhoods.
Listen, man, I respect you. I know what you're doing. You're taking care of your block. That's great.
I don't know.
Yeah, you know, man. If I fuck with you right now, you look like shit in front of your boys.
Stick a pin in Fallon's motivation, it becomes relevant later. By now, the fish out of water theme should be obvious. But the horror and suspense of the film comes from the fact that these guys keep expecting all the social conventions of the suburbs to save them, only to be told time and time again that those protections just don't exist out here.
17 minutes.
Down here, people die of old age, waiting for the cops.
No goddamn way.
It's this utter cluelessness that comes to a head with a rooftop confrontation between Denis Leary's Fallon and Jeremy Piven's Ray.
Easy, fellas. Hear me out a second. Just give me a chance to talk.
Convinced he'll never survive the rickety makeshift bridge to the next building, Ray instead does the heroic thing and destroys it, leaving himself at the mercy of Fallon and his crew, while ensuring that his friends could get a healthy head start. What follows is a face-off that is simultaneously the movie's best moment of chemistry between two actors and the most cringe-inducing, as Ray tries to negotiate with Fallon and his men.
How about $100,000 cash? Then we go our separate ways.
At this point, if you're just watching this as a series of set pieces maximized for suspense, it's a decent little flick. Stephen Hopkins is doing a fine job of putting the shots together. However, if you're tracking the, again, mostly accidental social commentary, this is a key scene.
You can raise that kind of money?
Yes, I can.
Wow. Let me ask you something. Those shoes, what are those, Italian?
Ray offers Fallon and his men $100,000 and a promise of silence to let him go, and he sweetens the deal by giving his $15,000 ring as down payment. And in a great moment, Fallon just starts toying with him, spouting off banal cliches and questioning him about his expensive shoes and stockbroker father.
And your dad's what, he's a stockbroker?
Something like that.
And it's clear, even to Ray, that Fallon is just barely masking contempt for North Shore yuppie assholes, and that's his motivating factor throughout the entire movie.
North Shore plates too, great. Just great.
It's why Fallon doesn't particularly care that he's racking up even more witnesses to his crimes while trying to track down the witnesses to his first crime. It's not even about them going to the police anymore. It's about them disrespecting him and his neighborhood.
You know, man, if I fuck with you right now, you look like shit in front of your boys.
The difference between them is Ray thinks Fallon's disdain is a negotiating tactic, and for Fallon, it's an ideology.
How much is this gonna cost?
Man, if I want your money, I'll take it.
No, you can't take my money. But you can take my money.
So Ray just keeps trying to smooth talk Fallon, alternately kissing up to him and trying to sweeten the pot. But unlike Fallon's earlier exchange with the local gang, it's not done out of respect. It's an insult. The poors are people to be bought, not respected. This triggers an epic Denis Leary rant about his hatred for the North Shore yuppies who read about the rundown neighborhoods in the paper from the comfort of their own homes, and then drive over the top of them to get to other parts of the city without, in the words of director Stephen Hopkins, having to drive through the scary part of town.
You and your friends are the kind of spoon-fed fucking fruit bait that I fucking hate! Chicks like you just sail through life reading about people like me in the newspaper. $100,000 might buy you out in the North Shore down here, pussy. That means shit! This is my fucking world!
Fallon tosses Ray off the roof, leading to a brief shootout before Frank and his friends run off again. And in a cold moment, Everlast tosses the $15,000 ring back at Ray's dead body. See, money is meaningless to them when compared to pride. The film then seems to embrace its resemblance to a video game as the guys descend into the sewer level, only to wind up in a game of red light, green light with Sykes, Fallon's second in command. Tellingly, Frank's baby brother Johnny, after talking a big game and picking a fight when it was a 4-on-1 on the freeway, freezes when confronted with real danger. Instead, Frank has to make the save and Mike finishes Sykes off, proving his masculinity.
Alright, who's the chicken shit now, huh?
This is the second level the film works on, and it's the one that Hopkins and screenwriter Lewis Collick want you to think about.
Everybody gets scared, whether they admit it or not. I'm scared too.
You have these four yuppie guys who are cosplaying masculinity. They're not actual men, not from the traditional image of manhood. They're manhood fans. They sleep around, they carouse, they wheel and deal, they peacock. They enjoy watching real men fight, and when they do get violent, they pick very safe fights, and they do so from the safety and security that their middle-class lifestyle offers them. But when confronted with real danger, none of these men know what to do because their biggest brush with danger is eating sushi a day after its sell-by date. Only Frank recognizes how vacant this is.
What is the matter with you, huh? This isn't a goddamn game!
So he's left it all behind to become a father and complain about the stock market and property taxes. This is a constant source of tension between Frank and Mike throughout the film. Frank thinks the boys are being stupid and immature. Mike thinks Frank has gone soft.
Married life making you soft, Frank? I remember when your brother would have dumped that guy on his ass.
After failing to catch a bus, the crew heads to the Fullerton Market, which I will assume is a reference to Chicago's famous Fulton Market, only more trademark friendly. And this sets up the world's longest third-act set piece, grinding the film to a halt. Mike takes out Everlast but winds up getting shot in the process and has to hide in a closet with John. That leaves Fallon and Frank to have their long-awaited one-on-one confrontation after a long series of stalking scenes. Frank, of course, digs deep into his inner manhood and drops Fallon off a platform onto some stairs, I guess an ironic retribution for Ray. It's actually pretty anticlimactic given all the trash talk Fallon was doing throughout the movie.
Bet you got a nice ass up there, huh, Frank?
Huh? Can't wait to meet your daughter.
The only thing he gets out here are threats against Frank's wife and daughter, and that sets off a fountain of action movie catchphrases from Frank.
You're on your own, pal. Don't call me Francis.
And after Frank has made his own save, the police finally show up, when the business was in danger. And that's Judgment Night, a film so focused on being a vapid action suspense flick that it ends on a happy off-screen reunification between Frank and his wife,
Wyatt, your wife's outside.
with no impact or mention of their friend Ray's death. All is well, order is restored. But behind all the suspense sequences is the story of just how little we think about the systemic problems we not only benefit from, but often contribute to. The filmmakers set out to portray the city of Chicago as a caricature, a near post-apocalyptic hellscape for their protagonists. And in ignoring the fact that urban blight is a man-made problem instead of just some natural inconvenience or danger to middle-class protagonists, the film actually makes a better point about their complicity in its problems. If you go into this one hoping for some escapism, you'll probably be fine. It's basically suspense porn, with the loose plot justifying a string of set pieces that allow Stephen Hopkins to direct the hell out of the scenes. And he does throw all the big tricks out there. Split diopters, halogen lamps, crane shots, silhouettes, and a Lady from Shanghai-esque finale. Hopkins' work elevates the film to being worthy of its cult status. The shots are certainly memorable, even if they don't always add anything to the scene. In fact, outside of Dennis Leary's rants, there's not a whole lot of substance to any of the scenes. Events only exist to get the characters to the next scene, which is fine for a bare-bones action movie, but films like Die Hard, Terminator, and Predator were wise enough to give us some quality character-building moments along the way. But I'm hopeful the next time you watch this, or if you seek it out for the first time, you'll keep in the back of your mind that location and urban design are very much characters in this film, and the problems and dangers, while cartoonishly over the top here, are consequences of our own decisions. Because the sooner we realize the almost feral NPCs these guys run into are the results of travesty and not tragedy, the sooner we'll gain empathy for the destruction our own decisions have caused, and that's at least a good start when trying to solve them. I hope you enjoyed the dive. Stay warm, stay safe, make good choices, return your shopping carts, get off the expressway once in a while and support local businesses, and I'll see you next time.